I'm in the middle of recapping, and right now what I'm trying to do is to get to that capacitor right there. What I've done is I've removed those leads that you see with little tags on them, and then I'm going to be pulling that out. To get to that, I had to remove this front part of the unit. These screws here were right here and here, and of course this was set against that, and then there were a couple of screws on the sides here that went in this hole and that one. That's the only way I could see to get to this sub-chassis. Also, some of the leads, like the ones on those two pins, are long enough for this to come out, but the switch, those leads weren't long enough, so I had to take it out of the panel. So that's where I am, and now I'll be trying to pull that capacitor out and rebuild the insides of it with some new electrolytics. By the way, while I was at this, I also noticed that the photo tube, the photo multiplier tube, which goes in that socket right there, looked like it was oriented wrong. It's supposed to face the screen up there, but it wasn't. You notice that right here there's a grid assembly. There you can see it. That's supposed to face the screen. Well, it was turned like this. So I pulled it out of the socket to see what was wrong, and it turns out what was wrong is that pin, the guide pin, had broken off, and apparently whoever broke it off had just put the tube back in any way they could think to, or any way it fit, which of course once that pin breaks off it'll fit any of 11 different ways. This is an 11 pin tube. It's kind of an odd, it's not an octal socket, although it has what looked like an octal keyway. It actually has 11 pins, and I'll talk about this tube a little bit later. It's a kind of unusual tube because it has no filament. It's a photomultiplier tube that depends entirely on secondary emission, so you put a high voltage across it. Anyway, we'll talk about that a little later when we get to the flying spot scanner. Okay, I pulled out the capacitor that comes out of that clamp right there, and I sawed the top off, put in some new capacitors in place of the old. Of course, you have to clean out all the wax and aluminum foil and electrolyte and everything. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut down the height of this a little bit. I'm going to leave all the markings as to value, but I'm going to cut off about, maybe 3/8 of an inch. And the reason is I want to be able to slide it all the way in there. But if I do, there's a possible problem with it getting in the way. I don't know if you can see very well, but there's the clamp, and then here's the photomultiplier tube. It goes about here, and so when that slides down, you see from here, you kind of have to sight across from there over to the bottom of the slide, which is right there. And as you might be able to see, that clamp is almost in the way, so you don't want the capacitor to stick up very much out of that clamp. When I get it mounted in there, I'll show you again, and it'll probably make more sense. But right now, the main thing is I don't want the capacitor to stick up very far from there, but at the same time, I'd like it to slide as far in to that clamp as possible. So, like I say, to do that, what I plan to do is just cut down the height of this a little bit before I glue it back together again. And there's plenty of room because the capacitors aren't anywhere near that tall. Thanks to the modern capacitors, you need a lot less room for the same capacity. So we'll see that in the next segment. And I cut down the height of this in order to fit a little better inside, and I'm now going to glue this together with JB Weld and reinstall it, and then I think you'll see why that I wanted to cut down the height to keep it from being in the way of the blind spot scanner. I've replaced the capacitor. You can see it right here. And you notice that it's painted black on top. That's to reduce reflections. And the reason is because it's in the path between the blind spot scanner there and the image tube, which is right here, the photomultiplier. And so the reason that I cut that down, you may remember, is so that I could put it back in here with the top flush with this mounting bracket. But also, I could lower the height inside. What I'm doing now is I'm replacing this tip jack right here. Now these are not banana plugs. They're called tip jacks, and I'll show you one a little later when I build up the cables for the front of this. But a banana plug will not fit in these. You either need an adapter or you need to actually buy a tip jack, which really aren't used much anymore, so they're getting kind of rare. Anyway, I'm replacing that one because the old one was completely sprung and just wouldn't hold a jack, or a plug, I should say. So anyway, I'll be back when I'm finished soldering this up, and we'll look at some more stuff. See how much nicer that one looks, and of course it'll hold a plug a lot better. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fire up the unit and see if it still works. I have it in the on position, and we're going to raise the line voltage watching the current. There's about 120 volts, and you see it's drawing right about an amp. It's going to go up a little bit as the B plus starts working in the unit. And now we'll come over here. You can see some of the tubes glowing. Yeah, now it's starting to light up on the screen. So now we'll go through and test voltages and signals and things like that to see whether we have a working unit or whether we still have some problems now that we've replaced the electrolytic capacitors and a few other components that were out of spec. And after repairing that photomultiplier tube right there, remember the base on it was cracked and it was inserted wrong, so hope that's still working tube, but we'll see.